All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone today's event is hosted by the National Council of Jewish Women, Pittsburgh. NCJW is a progressive Jewish feminist organization that has become a powerful force for social change, advocating for racial and gender equity in the Pittsburgh region. For more than 125 years, through our advocacy efforts and service programs, our mission has always been to step forward, speak out, and stand up for the needs of women, children, and families. And we are thrilled that you are joining us today as we discuss childcare advocacy. Bit of housekeeping, everyone, you can mute yourselves. I'll be monitoring the chat if you would feel more comfortable asking questions like anonymously or just typing them out. But you're also welcome to unmute, but I'll be watching the chat. And we also understand that life happens, so feel free to eat your lunch, and no worries if like a child or a cat or dog wanders on screen. That makes these events even more fun. So we are joined today by Lindsay and Emily from Trying Together, a Pittsburgh-based organization that serves 10 counties in southwestern PA to elevate the voice of the early childhood field through advocacy. So yay. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Abby. We're so happy to be here. And we have a small group, so hopefully we can make this more conversational as we go through the presentation.
Sounds great to me. Yeah, I love those are the most fun events. It's just where everyone gets to kind of chat. Those are my favorites. So
For sure.
Lindsay, do you want me to share my slides?
Sure.
My screen? Cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Oh, can we have Abby? Can you give me screen sharing control?
Should have just went through.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Oh, there it is. Quick. Make sure I have it up so we can share. Sometimes it doesn't like what you want to share is like at the bottom. Okay, now it's
yeah.
Okay, here we go. All right.
All righty, everybody. So we already briefly on our previous presentation discussed Advocacy 101, but now we're going to shift forward to Advocacy 201, crafting and sharing your message. And we love this one because advocacy is so important, and a huge part of that advocacy is just simply telling your story. Again, my name is Lindsay Ramsey. I'm Assistant Director of Policy and Practice at Trying Together, and my colleagues here.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Neff. I am Director of Public Policy at Trying Together.
So at Trying Together, we envision a future in which all caregivers feel valued. So we really would just like to mention here that we appreciate your voice, and the stories that you tell, again, are a huge, huge piece of this advocacy. Today, whenever we go through this presentation, we're going to apply our ECE experience in child development knowledge and storytelling to develop advocacy messaging and talking points. And whenever we talk about that ECE experience, you all as mothers have tons of experience in early childhood education. Whether you like to acknowledge it or not, it's all there. We're going to demonstrate strategies for engaging with elected officials and communicating advocacy priorities for early learning, and we're going to reflect and practice how you will share your story.
And so when we talk about advocacy, we always like to, start here with, what do we mean when we talk about advocacy? If you want to share in the chat with us, like quickly, like what does advocacy mean to you? Or if you want to come off mute, when you hear the word advocacy, like what do you think of? What does that mean to you?
I can start. For me, advocacy can sometimes seem a little like an intimidating word, but it's something that we do all the time, whether we're, just at the pediatrician, bringing our kid in for an emergency, like advocating for their health, maybe just insisting a little that they run an extra test. That's advocacy, self-advocacy, medical advocacy. We do stuff like that all the time. And otherwise just sort of even just firing off an email to your legislator. I think I do that multiple times a week these days. That's advocacy. You know, there's a lot, just sharing what your needs are, sharing what society's needs are with people who can help.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say even educating in conversation with people, like with your family members, with people you're chatting with in the grocery store line, whatever it happens to be. If you have a particular belief about something, kind of sharing your knowledge with someone else.
Yeah.
Lisa added in the chat, fighting for what you believe in. That feels really inspiring. I like defining advocacy that way. It just feels like a call to, you know, like, you can do it, you can fight.
Yeah. Those are all great examples. And I think our point really today is there's no right or wrong way to tell your story and advocate. And I think, Abby, I really liked that you gave a specific example of, like, when you go to the doctor and you say, no, I want that extra test. Like, that might be something that we don't think of as advocacy, but it absolutely is. And we'll talk today about, you know, what that looks like through our campaigns and how we do that work around early childhood education. But I appreciate everyone for, you know, chiming in and sharing what advocacy means to them and what they think it looks like. So for us, you know, we like to, you know, all of those things are things that we do. But I think the way we kind of define advocacy and how we approach our work at Trying Together and with our partner campaigns is we think about it kind of in 5 different buckets. So we have like the government relations piece, which I think can be like the most intimidating piece, right? It's having to, you know, form some of those relationships and talk to your elected officials. Kate, I think you said education and awareness. This is where a lot of that occurs, right? So like we have to, you know, as Lindsay said, y'all are the experts in, you know, your own child. You are the experts in like knowing what that development looks like and what your needs are. So it's really bringing those concerns and stories to elected officials. That's a really important part of our advocacy, is having those relationships so that we can educate and advocate. Mobilization, I think, is like one of the most important pieces. It's like the biggest piece, I think, of what we do, and such an important piece. When we go to those government officials, we have to mobilize. We mobilize moms, we mobilize providers and teachers, we mobilize other caregivers. It's really important that we have people with us. It might be at a meeting that we mobilize, but could also be like mobilizing by sending that email, mobilizing by coming to an event and getting you really fired up so that you go and tell like 10 other people, hey, this issue is like, did you know there was a crisis? And that, you know, we need to tell more people about this issue. So it can look like very different in different ways. Communications is really strongly connected, I think, to mobilization. This might be that you go and you go to an event to learn about something, you get really charged up about it, and then you post on your social media and you're communicating that way with your network. And so communications is a really important piece of how we're reaching people, how we're communicating about our issues, and how, you know, early learning is impacting, you know, families and working moms and children and the providers. And so, of course, too, we look at research and we look at policy recommendations, and we're making those as well along the way. So those are all the ways that, you know, we really see advocacy. So everything people said, like everything that's been raised, like that all fits in with like the way we do a lot of our work. And all of these really intersect too, but I think sometimes it helps to like really break down, what does advocacy look like? And so with Trying Together, we're really fortunate that we have a structure to really advocate. We're part of the Early Learning Pennsylvania campaign, which is a coalition of statewide partners that have the expertise and focus on early childhood education. And within that coalition, we have different campaigns that focus on different aspects of early childhood education. So the very first campaign was the Pre-K for PA campaign. And it really advocates around state investments in pre-K programs. We're really lucky in Pennsylvania to have a state program called Pre-K Counts for eligible families. And we do a lot of advocacy around increased investments for that program, as well as increased investments for Head Start supplemental assistance at the state level.
The next campaign is our Childhood Begins at Home campaign, which focuses on evidence home-based visiting for children and families, and making sure they're strengthening that partnership between the school, home, and the family. And then we have our Start Strong for PA campaign, which we often talk about. We wish this was the first campaign because it talks about great investments and adequate investments for infant and toddler childcare, and making sure that families have access to high quality care, that it's affordable, and the professionals in the field have the adequate investments and support to be able to hold up the work.
And then finally, we have Thriving PA, and this is the newest campaign. It's really about thinking about all of those health and wellness pieces that surround new moms and their babies. So this focuses on advocacy around, perinatal health. It focuses on like lead abatement, on supplemental nutritional services, and really all of those pieces that go into like being such an important part of a child's development in their earlier years. So Trying Together plays more of a supporting role on this campaign, but we absolutely, like the connection to those first 5 years. A lot of what this campaign is focusing on is really, really important for both the child and the mother.
So next, we're going to get into the power of messaging, and you'll hear us tell you throughout this whole presentation and any ongoing communication that we have with you that your voice matters and your stories are the most powerful in terms of advocacy. They really, any elected official, any leader, any audience that you're speaking to really wants to hear from the people who have those experiences with early childhood, whether it be a family, whether it be a parent, whether it be an educator in the field, and they want to hear exactly how it's impacting you. Effective messaging helps advocates communicate key points to their audiences that can potentially influence their level of support. So often whenever we go on visits to elected officials' office, we will bring along a provider or a parent to share their story because they have those everyday experiences. Messaging is most powerful when it comes directly from those constituents and those with those real life experiences, just as I mentioned. You guys have those everyday stories and you're experiencing it all the time. And elected officials remember stories from their constituents. A lot of these stories that come from you are very heartfelt, they're very passionate, and they hold a lot of emotion. And that's exactly what our elected officials or any audience wants to hear to influence their support. So often whenever you come to them with these stories, it does influence a vote or it does inform policy because they remember whenever they are doing their work, how it impacted their constituents. And we're going to get a little bit into strands of messaging here because whenever we are telling our stories, we like to connect them with messages. Every single story that we have is been a cause from an experience or something that you felt or an emotion that you felt, or it's connected to a message. So often whenever we are advocating for early childhood, we have different strands that people can really hone in on to help support their messages. So the first one is being ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and toxic stress. So early childhood education in those environments serve as a safe haven for families often. There are many children who are experiencing trauma within their homes or trauma within their environments, and they are turning to their early learning environments to keep them safe and keep them engaged, and they really serve as a community stakeholder to be able to support children and families. So this is a strand that we have a lot of people use often. And a lot of educators are able to hone in on this often too, as they are experiencing these traumas that in the classroom from children or stories that parents are telling them. We have high quality teachers and environments. Again, these environments hold so much power on overall development for children. So whenever we talk about the importance of high quality early childhood education, we like to mention how important this environment is on brain development, on further development, social, emotional development, physical, everything. And how the importance of high quality plays such a big part in that work. Again, to hone in a little bit on that brain development and an executive function piece, the brain develops the most within the first 5 years. Children are often in early childhood environments more than 8 hours a day. And then interactions that they have in those environments are so important to their brain development and their executive function. So these are stories that are told often too on how making sure these environments are accessible early on really impact that developmental trajectory. And return on investments. We know that if children have great experiences early on, that impacts them later in life. It gives them better opportunity and better chance to have a successful path to development and through adulthood. Over the COVID-19 pandemic, the local business community and the COVID-19 strands of messaging were really strong. We had a lot of community stakeholders, a lot of small businesses elevate their voice in the support of the field because they realized how important access to early childhood education was for their workers, and being able to get their workers into the building and having that support that they need to be able to just hold up the workforce. So through the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to get a lot of support from the business community in telling their stories of why our families need access, why it needs to be affordable, and how it supports the workforce. And again, that COVID-19 messaging too, a big piece of that was acknowledging the fact that our workforce of early childhood professionals are essential workers. It's really important that they are here supporting us because they are a workforce backing the workforce. So these are many strands that people can use, but whenever we ask people to tell their stories, we want them to tell it in a way that is most authentic and most comfortable for them. So they are free to use any of these messaging strands, but also you can use others as well to help share and craft your story.
Yeah, and Lindsay, I'm thinking as I'm listening to you go through them too, especially the workforce piece for moms who are working or wanted to return to work, that was a huge strand we saw with the workforce piece. Of like, we all saw the national data and trends of women having to leave the workforce and take on additional caregiving and teaching essentially during the pandemic. So I think that is really important. And that is, the campaign partners have done reports around that about like getting women to return back to work. So we'll continue to kind of talk about that, like what Lindsay talked about is like having a high quality workforce and why that's so important to access. But I imagine that's another kind of strand that could be important for this group. But Lindsay went through all of them. So we just wanted to like dive a little bit deeper into some of the different ones. Abby, did you want to, any questions or anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that our NCJW CEO said, which has really stuck with me, that the Great Resignation isn't really the Great Resignation. It's been moms and women being pushed out. Mm-hmm. And so all the ways that businesses are trying to, stem and fix the Great Resignation, if they're ignoring, childcare and women, right, then they're missing the mark and they're never going to fix it, Yep. And that really is stuck with me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think, and it's like, to Lindsay's point, you can find if someone else says something, like if someone says something you really like and it makes you think of a way you want to tell a story, or there's other pieces of research like the Great Resignation and you want to take that and like make it work like that, that is exactly like what we're talking about, is like what inspires you and like taking that and like using it to tell your story. I think with like return on investment for childcare, this can be effective, and I'll say like, we'll get a little more into this, but with childcare and pre-K, like these are like really bipartisan issues. So we speak to folks on both sides of the aisle. We speak to people with a range of ideologies and like where they fall. So oftentimes that's why when we talk about why messaging is important, sometimes we have to make sure that when we're talking to the person that they're going to connect with that messaging strand. It's never about changing it's never about changing your value or changing your story, but it's about connecting it to something that they'll also connect to. So I think, return on investment is a really great one for maybe some of the folks who won't connect to like brain development, right? There's going to be people that don't connect to that message point as much, but they are going to connect to the fact that for every dollar, like there's a 13% return on investment per child per year. And we can like pull research that like, I forget what the most recent one is, but like for every dollar, there's like a $7 return. It was like, I've seen research that goes up to $14 return. But we know that there is a return on investment. And not just like financially, but there's a 2-generational impact. It helps mothers establish careers and grow their income. And then it helps them, be able to, pay for childcare and like have that piece. And then the child also is getting that high quality, brain, like learning and growing. And like, then they're set off on a trajectory. And then too, we just know that high quality pays off, not just in the short term, but in the long term in terms of like boosting like cognitive skills as well as social and emotional skills, making and there not being as much fade out when it's coupled with high quality like K-12 experiences. So the return on investment piece is always like a really good piece to go back to. I've heard a lot of moms and parents like talk about it in the sense of like, my child learned so much in pre-K. Like, I cannot believe the things they knew. I would have never been able to teach them that. I would have never thought to tell my 3- and 4-year-old that, and that they could have like learned that. And like, we hear that a lot. And then like, they go to kindergarten, they're like, my kid was so prepared for kindergarten because of their pre-K teachers, because they have this high quality experience. And of course, a high quality experience also is really great on like the family engagement piece too. So you're also like, you're your child's first teacher, but these are folks that are like trained and dedicated to like have those hours with those children for education, and they like include you in that process. And so there's so much return on that investment. And so I've heard a lot of the parents use that story as they talk about the impact of early learning.
Yeah, I think you're quoting me there. That sounds like things that I've said. It's
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, that they just like some of the, and even me too in this field, like sometimes I hear like what 3- and 4-year-olds are doing in their classroom, and I'm like, I wish I was doing that at age 3 and 4. It's amazing what's happening in classrooms now, and like what teachers, how they're speaking with children, and like what they're able to accomplish. And so I think, here we have, Lindsay talked a lot about brain development and toxic stress, and really at the center of all of this and what can really help with that foundation is, that the adult-child interaction. So I can play this video for you, but I'm realizing now when I shared my screen, I don't think I shared the sound. So I'm going to come in and out, and then I can play the video. But I think like little videos like this are always really impactful because you can like send them to a family member that you want to try to like get more on board, or to a friend, or, send it to your elected official that using like, so this is why we like highlight different resources like this. It's all really helpful in making the case.
The healthy development of young children in the early years of life literally does provide a foundation for just about all of the challenging social problems that our society and other societies face. What we're learning from exciting developments in neuroscience and molecular biology is how much early experience from birth, in fact, even before birth, how much this experience literally gets into our bodies and shapes our learning capacities, our behaviors, and our physical and mental health. The brain is basically built from the bottom up. First, the brain builds basic circuits, and then more complex circuits are built on top of those basic circuits as we develop more complex skills. Biologically, the brain is prepared to be shaped by experience. It's expecting the experiences that a young child has to literally influence the formation of its circuitry. The brain is a highly integrated organ which has multiple sections that specialize in different processes. Parts of the brain are involved more in cognitive function, and other parts that are involved in processing of emotion, and parts involved in seeing and hearing. So if a child is emotionally well put together, that will affect more positive and productive learning. And if a child is preoccupied with fears or anxiety, no matter how intellectually gifted that child might be, his or her learning is going to be impaired by that kind of emotional interference. So when we talk about healthy development in the early years, and particularly when we talk about preparing children to succeed in school, we cannot separate cognitive development from social and emotional development. You can't have one without the other. So when children experience stable, nurturing relationships, it fosters the development of healthy circuitry. And when children experience uncertainty or instability, it literally disrupts the circuitry and the brain's architecture as it's being built. Over time, this has a wear and tear effect. And the more stress you have, the more likely you are to have a whole range of problems later on. And this is why excessive, prolonged stress early in life is associated with a higher prevalence later, not only of learning problems and behavior difficulties, but also physical and mental health problems. The brain is optimally flexible and plastic early in life, but as it develops its circuitry and refines its circuitry, it loses some of its flexibility, which is why intervening early is so important, because as we often say, when it comes to brain circuitry, it's better to get it right the first time than to try to fix it later.
We really like that video with like the really simple illustrations and really being able to like show and explain in a really clear way, like that, not just like laying the foundation, but also what stress can do to a child's brain in those first 5 years. I think we've probably share this later in the presentation because it's just something we always come back to, but like 90% of a child's brain develops before age 5. And for a while, I was, telling Lindsay, I was like, I stopped using that stat for a while because I was like, I feel like we used it for so many years. Like people it has to have clicked. And then I used it again into a reporter. And then I used it again to a legislator and their jaws dropped. And I was like, wait a second, we're not using this research point enough because people did it, but people aren't remembering. But it's like that repetition. So if you hear us repeat it, that's why. I think it was really good to see that that's while we do this work every day and while parents can see that connection and know that connection, to actually hear that 90% of that foundation of those connections are made. That's why this is so important. And this video really illustrates that really beautifully.
So another resource that we use is our Pre-K for PA and Start Strong fact sheets. So right here, you'll see an example of our Pre-K for PA fact sheets. It's data driven, that's collected across the state. We use this during visits with elected officials. We use it during visits with honestly any audience that we have, just to display the need for access and high quality publicly funded pre-K or high quality infant and toddler care. So here it gives you information on how many children are eligible and how many children don't have access. Just being able to look at those numbers sometimes during conversation is really an eye opener. A lot of the times for elected officials, for them to see, who doesn't have access in the state. Or we actually have these sheets compiled into data for counties and districts as well. So they're able to look at information specifically for their own district and see how many children are eligible, how many children aren't receiving care, and how that's impacting their children and families in their areas. It also gives some information on the benefits and how it impacts long-term and short-term for our children and families. And it's just really important to have numbers and data alongside with you whenever you're going on these meetings, because that's sometimes things that certain people who you're speaking to look for. Some people are more data driven and they want to see a number to go along with your story or message. So this is just an additional tool that we use. Bless you. And so we are going to watch briefly a clip from a childcare teacher in our area. She's from our region, and she's discussing high quality teaching and environments. And she's really just giving a rundown of what her day looks like and what she does in a high quality classroom. I am a huge, huge advocate of the early childhood workforce. I'm a former teacher and provider. So I personally have experienced what the day in and day out looks like from that perspective, and it drives my storytelling. So I advocate so much for the workforce because it's been such an underfunded, undervalued field with work that it has been done from women and disproportionately women of color. And so to me, that faces not only as a childcare issue, but also a social justice issue. And it's really imperative that we focus on increasing investments for adequate compensation for our workforce because of all the high quality, crucial work that they do for our children and families. And to take note of that, they should be able to get a compensation that allows them to help their own families thrive and their own children thrive as well. So it's really just creating equity in our communities and equity within our societies. But we can go to the clip now.
As a teacher, I do lesson plans, and some of the things that we teach the children are like math, literacy, fine motor, gross motor, science, sensory. All these different areas help to get them ready and prepared for when they actually enter into a school district, for when they start preschool and kindergarten. In my field, we believe that learning through play is the best way to teach children, especially at this age. During the conferences, we go over different skills such as social, emotional, cognitive, language, math, science, social studies, things that you would see them doing in a school district, or things that they would need to know for when they start kindergarten. I like to do the parent-teacher conferences with the parents because it gives me better ideas on ways that I can improve some of the skills that the children are falling behind in. And if the teacher and the parent are on the same page with how they can improve these skills, it makes it a lot easier for the child to improve going forward.
Thanks for sharing that, Emily. So as you heard her, she is really passionate about the work that she's doing with children in her own environment, in her own space. And that gives note to, our teachers being the center of what high quality looks like. And I saw somebody chime in on the chat, whenever teachers experience trauma, because they experience trauma themselves, that weighs in and reflects in their own work. So in turn, in order to make sure that we are delivering high quality and that children have those positive experiences, we need to make sure that our teachers are supported as well and they're having positive experiences in their own workspace. So thank you for elevating that in the chat. Again, these are some more resources that we love to use. We recently just released a report called Elevating the Early Childhood Workforce. And it was really driven by the voice of the early childhood providers in our region and just in our field in general. And those stories from them about what they're experiencing and how their work has become so difficult. It's never been easy, but it's become even more difficult to deliver that resource for children and families of having a high quality environment without the proper investments in the field. So we have this report readily available to use. for suggestions on how to support our early childhood professionals, and just as a resource to really depict the story of what their work looks like and how it impacts our society. On that other side of the screen, you'll see results from our March 2022 survey for our childcare crisis survey. So we did 2 of these. One was closer to the pandemic. It was like when the pandemic was still like high and everything was happening. I think it was in the fall of last year. And this is the second one we just conducted in March, because we realized and acknowledged the staffing shortage has become unbearable. Childcare providers are shutting their doors, they're shutting down classroom, and families no longer have access to high quality. And this is because of the pandemic changing the infrastructure of the workforce so much, and people driving up how much they're paying their employees, but the early childhood field doesn't have the resources to do the same. We hear so often that our providers are experiencing staff leaving to go to not to go to other centers, but to completely leave the field of early childhood education. We have places like Target, like Walmart, like Get Go, who are giving their employees $19, $20 an hour to do the work, and the work is less strenuous than working in a classroom for 8+ hours a day. And people aren't realizing all that work that's being put in an early childhood classroom, that constitutes for a higher pay. So that's one of the reasons why we pulled this research and pulled this data to tell the story of how this is impacting our field, how the lack of investments in the field and the workforce and in their pay and their wage is impacting the field now. So you'll see here. Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, what is the average right now in PA? Is it $12 an hour for childcare workers? $12? And that's.
I thought
it's like, I mean, the last data point I saw was under 11.
Yeah, I think it was a 1040.
The average. Yeah. But
and
yeah, it could be that it's 12 in this region though. But yeah, it's really, it's very low. I mean, the average is across the state.
Yeah, I think that the last, like we get different numbers. But I remember one of the last numbers we got was pulled from ADP, and it was exactly at 11. And before that, we got something around 1040. And this is for, a credentialed worker.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would add too that, like, to Lindsay's point, we have to find and draw data from different sources. We don't really have a great system for tracking the early childhood educators and their demographics, their years experience, their race and ethnicity, what they're making, who they're teaching, where they're teaching. And so that is something the campaigns have been working on in terms of trying to work with a legislator to establish a commission that could start to look at this and to basically take data from a registry that OCDEL has, the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, and then data from the labor and industry and overlap the two to actually get some stats. But we have to find it where we can right now. It's definitely something we need better data.
Yeah. This the Pennsylvania Childcare Crisis March survey and the one prior came directly from our Start Strong campaign. So it came directly from the Early Learning PA campaigns, and it was delivered to providers. For the March survey, 994 programs responded. 91% indicated that they have a staffing shortage. That's pretty much almost everybody. Low wages and lack of benefits have resulted in 6,983 open staff positions. 454 children currently are on waiting lists. 1,603 classrooms are completely closed, which is heartbreaking to have to close a whole classroom. And programs responded, 30,243 additional children could be served if they were fully staffed. So when we think about, the impact that these closed classrooms have on the workforce, have on mothers in particular, who have either lost their job over the pandemic or trying to enter back into the workforce, or who still maintain their position but lost their childcare and still are struggling to balance to figure things out. So then they can in turn be able to function comfortably. This is a huge issue in equity, and it is greatly impacting our children and families. So more of our messaging examples, again, we have that workforce behind the workforce. We like to jam that in every chance that we can, because the campaigns are fiercely advocating for increased investments in wages and supports and resources for our childcare workforce. They deserve so much more than what they're getting. And if we don't address this issue and it continues to, the field continues to operate in the state that it is, there's not going to be a field in a few years. There's not going to be access for children and families. So again, they're the center of the work, and we need to make sure that we're elevating and respecting their work, and also making sure that they are compensated in a manner that helps them thrive. We have that brain research again, that 90% of the brain development occurs within the first 5 years. That's huge. And we like to hammer this one in as well, because it often people don't realize how important infant and toddler care are, and the importance of investments specifically into childcare. People often can't differentiate between childcare and what childcare is for infants and toddlers and what pre-K and preschool is. They think whenever we get investments in preschool and pre-K, they're like, yeah, like this is it, we got it. And we're like, yes, but we also need this. We also need the investments for infant and toddler care first, because they are the opening gates for child development. Aside from the parent having strong connections prenatally and those supports, and the parent being the first teacher, infant and toddler care and the support of supporting childcare really is the next step. And the infant and toddler care, that piece is the most underinvested in, and it's the part where our children's brains develop the most. So being able to piece those two together, that brain development message really helps. And we have our hashtag. So the campaigns utilize social media frequently and often to be able to reach out to all different types of audiences. So we'll often have Twitter storms, or we'll often make social media posts, and we get support from our providers providing pictures and stories to do so. And we like to partner them along with hashtags, and sometimes they're hashtags that are just specifically early learning PA campaign driven. And then sometimes they might connect to work that our national partner is doing, that NACI is doing. So here you'll see hashtag solve childcare, because these issues of underinvestments with childcare it's not new. A lot of people are becoming more aware of it due to the challenges families experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the field has historically been underfunded. So we're at a state now where we're no longer seeking to save the field. We have to solve the issues in the field. We don't need short-term answers. We need long-term sustainable investments that will help solve these issues. So that's a hashtag that we use often. And also we want to raise childcare. And when we're thinking about this, we want to raise the wage for the profession. We want to raise the investments for the profession. We want to raise the acknowledgement and respect for the field. So these are things that we use on social media, and we encourage any advocates to go on their social media and engage their networks, use these hashtags, tell their story, and push it out to everybody that they know.
So now we're going to get into some examples, and this part can be as interactive as you want it to be, because we want to like practice what from two very different legislators' standpoints, very different like backgrounds, different political parties. So I always think it's fun to kind of do this part all together around like how we might potentially convey a message to an elected official. And there you'll see, this is when this is when actually, so this is a great photo. This was when Mayor Gainey was still State Rep Gainey, and we brought a child, like this pre-pandemic, and we were able to get children and some parents and teachers up into the Capitol. And it's always was great visiting him and being in the building with people. I hope that we just got back to like going to the Capitol this past year. We just took trying to gather staff this year, but I do hope in the future we can bring like more families and more providers and children as well, because it's always fun when more of us are there. So let's get into an example. So this is a senator. He's from the other side of the state, but we have done this before. We picked him to kind of just, he's from the other side of the state, picked some different characteristics. So he's a Republican, and these might be older committee assignments for him, but it works for the purpose of our activity today. So these are some of his committee assignments, and then of course his background as well. So thinking about, when I thinking about this and looking at this, all of this information is available. There's a lot of platforms that's available on, but if you just like look up Pennsylvania General Assembly and you click the first link, it takes you to the information where like you can find out who your legislator is by entering your address. You can look at every legislator and what they look like, what their bios are. You can look at session schedules. You can look up bills. Like that website's a really good place to go for like some quick resources. So this information is literally just pulled from that website. When we go and meet with legislators, we typically just do a refresher on their background. Social media is always a good place to look, like what's the most recent video they posted, like what are they currently talking about and what matters to them right now. So that's always a good place to go to get something a little more recent. But I think for Senator Argyle, I'm curious if anybody, when you think about some of like the strands of messaging we went over and you look at some of his committee assignments and his career and his background, where would you take this conversation? Like, which strand do you think you would pull on? Feel free to unmute or add into the chat if you have any thoughts.
I guess if it were me, just looking at kind of like finance and community and economic development, I'd almost think about increased workforce engagement for women, and all of the taxes that would bring in, like as callous as that sort of sounds, and just that return on investment that childcare provides. I'd almost want to go that way. Kate says that's her thought as well.
Yeah. Any others? That's great. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think too, and that's why we have the messaging strands, and that's why I always say it might not be the messaging strand that pulls on your heartstring, and it might, because you said it seems callous, but like, and that's so funny. Yeah, because it's like, of course, like I know, Abby, we've had many conversations, so I know how you view it, and what pulls on your heartstrings, right? But what might really connect to like what matters to him, it's totally fine. And you can still share the same story. It's just like thinking about like how do you get to like the end result of like where you're connecting it to him. So I think it's great to just be able to like kind of have an idea of like what he might connect to best, even if it's what you don't necessarily connect to. So thanks for sharing your thoughts around that too. Okay, we have another example as well. So Representative Summer Lee, which, she's at our way, I'm sure many of you know of her or know her. But we pulled, again, some of her committee assignments in her career and background. So curious, which way do you think you would go with Representative Lee?
So this one seems to me a little more obvious because of her children and youth. So talking about brain plasticity and mental health, and we want to try to build that early strong foundation and stable foundation so that we are not seeing kids ending up in the criminal justice reform system. That's kind of how I'd approach it.
Absolutely. Yep. That's great. Yeah, that's definitely like how we would approach it. And I think too, with Representative Lee, when we've met with her in the past, we've been able to dig a little bit deeper too into some of our issues around like equity and like what high quality looks like and how high quality should encompass like culturally responsiveness. Like we've had some of those conversations with her. It's been a while since we've met with her. Obviously, she's very busy right now, but I think we will probably be doing like a STARS move up with a program in her district soon. So hopefully we'll get to reconnect with her soon. But yeah, that's great. That's exactly right. Like just thinking about, again, you just pull like, and this is literally just the bulleted stuff you can pull. Like I'm at, like I said, there's so much stuff available. And I always would encourage you too, is like, well, when you're like, if you're going to, you're like someone who's like, you're a constituent of them, always like highlighting that too. And like talking about things, in the district and trying to like make some of those personal, smaller connections. But if for some reason you're doing advocacy with someone that you're like not in the district of, that's when too you can like watch a video and say, how's that, issue on like housing repair going? Like asking them a question about something they care about. So they also then know, oh, they're paying attention. So those are a couple of other like quick tips, but it's really great because like it's so accessible on social media now to have like the most recent up-to-date information.
So now that we have all this information and we did a little practice, we're going to think about how we can mobilize and engage others. So feel free to drop in the chat, but also come off mic. How would you craft a message to encourage your fellow early learning or your fellow parents, families, early childhood professionals, your fellow networks, anybody to join in advocating for the early childhood field?
So I'll come off mic. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a parent who, I have 4 kids. My youngest is 12 and my oldest is 20. So I've been through the early childhood experience 4 times. But I feel like I'm at the point now where I have some sort of 20/20 hindsight. So I guess what I would do is encourage my friends and myself to talk about it from that perspective, to say like, I made decisions based on what was going on at the time. And maybe if there had been more availability, better costs, all these kinds of things, I actually too kind of felt a little guilty that the programs were that they got paid so the pay rate was so low. Mm-hmm. So I almost felt guilty taking my kids there. So, but looking at it from that perspective, from sort of looking at it from my rearview mirror almost, because I can say now that what the impacts have been based on the decisions I've made.
Yeah, people often don't realize how much responsibility an early childhood educator has. And the amount that they get paid doesn't add up to anything close of what that responsibility is. Like they're literally responsible for a child's life for over 8 hours a day. Making sure they stay safe, making sure they stay healthy, making sure they're getting the social emotional supports that they need, making sure that the family supported with resources, along with managing a whole classroom, writing lesson plans, following early learning standards, like making sure that they are taking the proper professional development they need to meet regulations. It's a lot. And there's so much more than that added to it. It's a lot. Anybody else want to hop in? All right, so now again, we're going to mention in sharing your message, there is no right or wrong way to share your story. And these are some things you might want to consider. Think about who your audience is. It might not be an elected official. It might be your neighbor, it might be your own mother, it might be a friend. Anybody, could be a local business owner you're speaking to. Just like we talked about doing research with our elected officials, make sure you're compiling your research and like looking at the perspective of who you might be interacting with and being able to supply them with great talking points around their interests. Think about what makes you feel most comfortable. Be authentic with your story too. Make sure you are comfortable telling your story, because that's where the passion comes out. What's your goal in sharing your story? What's the outcome? What do you want? Are you seeking for increased investments? Do you want better resources? Do you want there to be more access? Think about what you want these outcomes to be of your advocacy. And how do you want to share? There are so many different ways to share your story, whether it be a meeting, whether it be over the phone, whether it be you writing a letter, op-ed, posting to social media. There's so many different ways, and we want you to do what's most comfortable to you. These are just some additional ways that you can share. You could host a virtual meeting. Like I mentioned before, schedule a phone call, email, social media, write a letter to the editor, op-ed. We have a wonderful documentary called No Small Matter that it literally touches on every single strand of messaging. And it's a tearjerker too. So we can set up a viewing for that. And there are other documentaries that we can use too. Or you could attend an in-person meeting at your program district or Harrisburg. We are back again, like Emily mentioned, doing capital caravans. So there's lots of opportunities to share your message, and we are here to help support you in that. And these are just some examples. This is a social media post, and here you can see those hashtags that we talked about earlier. Making sure that we are hashtag solving childcare. And during this time, that was when Build Back Better was on the table. So we had a hashtag for Build Back Better as well. As unfortunately, as you know, that did not go the way we wanted it to. But we have, a lot more leverage and a lot more information to help advocate for more in the future. But you see here, this is a provider, and she's like sharing her quote and sharing her story, and her face is there. So the public, the audience is able to connect a physical person, a physical face, and a quote on how this is impacting real people. And then we have a picture of a LTE that got published in the Observer Reporter, and this is from another provider. So here you can see they are advocating for pre-K counts and Head Starts. So it's just a simple little paragraph. It's quick to write, and we can help you write those as well. And we'll also help you guide that to the right media outlet. So it can get published, so people can see, see your opinions, see your thoughts, and how it impacts others.
I know we're a little past 1, but I think we're nearing the end. If that's good with folks, we'll go through this. But I think it is really important to kind of show the impact of sharing our ECE stories. Like as Lindsay mentioned, unfortunately, we did a lot of advocacy around Build Back Better, and unfortunately that did not, it didn't continue to go the way it was going. And now it's looking like in reconciliation, childcare and early learning might not be in that package, which is really frustrating. However, also want to highlight the good, to show that sharing ECE stories, it really does make a difference, and it does matter. There's just sometimes negotiations and politicking we can't control. But with pre-K counts, we mentioned Pennsylvania has its own pre-K counts program. We're celebrating its 15th anniversary this year. It started with an initial appropriation of $75 million. Since then, state policymakers across different governor administrations, bipartisan, have invested $300 million in this program. The current investment for this year, there was an increase of $60 million, which included funding to increase the rates at what we're paying providers, which helps pay teachers more. it's going to serve about 2,300 more children too. So that was a historic investment. So that was really good news. I think with federal stimulus funding, every single stimulus package we saw, there was money that came through specifically for childcare always. When Pennsylvania, these are the amounts Pennsylvania received from each of those federal stimulus packages. And when Pennsylvania was dispersing the CARES Act funding, that first round, there was $106 million through CCDBG, which is the Child Care and Development Block Grant. It's what at the federal level, how money flows to states to pay for like childcare subsidies and support quality and among other things in the field and the system. But the governor and General Assembly appropriated 116 million from discretionary funds at that time to additionally go out to providers. That was a really big win. They were hearing that we needed help. With ARPA, that was like the American Rescue Plan, that was like the biggest investment in childcare we've ever seen. Pennsylvania got 1.2 billion for that. We've used it for, workforce grants. We've used it for, a lot of it's gone towards retaining teachers, but it also has been used to increase the subsidy rate for what we're paying providers who serve children who are eligible for subsidy. And with the budget, one of the wins in the budget this year is, although we wanted sustainable funding, we did still get $90 million for recruitment and retention. So I think that while this wasn't exactly the way we wanted it, it's a leverage we can keep using in the future to say, hey, now you need to figure out how to make this happen every year with sustainable money. We cannot go back to providers not being able to give, of course we want to just bump up the pay. We want public investment to bump up the pay, but we definitely can't go back to where they're not even getting bonuses and way, to help recruit and retain. So there is great impact and there is a lot of wins that we did want to highlight too.
Now what? So now that we have all this information, now that we have these strategies to help us tell our stories and share our stories, we are encouraging you to get out there and advocate. And again, we want you to advocate in a way that makes you feel most comfortable, and a way that is most authentic to telling your true story. So we have some resources available for you. We have the links to our early learning PA campaign websites. So we will make sure that we get those resources over, and we can definitely drop those in the chat too. We have our Pre-K for PA campaign, our Start Strong PA campaign, Childhood Begins at Home, Thriving PA, and our website to join the Facebook group for our PA childcare voters, which are that initiative is being run through Children's First, and it's advocacy on encouraging and educating our families about the importance of voting, being registered to vote, and also their right to vote, and learn more about those candidates and how they are supporting the early childhood field and their perspectives and their thoughts on this, the support for the field. And again, we just want to remind you that your voice as a parent, as an advocate, as a mother, matters the most. You are the expert in this advocacy work. There's no need to fear or be afraid to tell your story, because these elected officials are here to work for you. They're here to support you. And we encourage you to advocate, and we are looking forward to advocating with you and hearing your stories and being strategic about how we share and the way we can help support you. Thank you so much for having us today.